Dew forms on cool morning grass, and each blade holds a bead. A still lake reflects a pale sky, smooth as polished glass. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, then slides in slow lines. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, plush and deep. A slow river bends through a quiet meadow, carrying small ripples downstream. Fog settles into low valleys, settling like a light blanket. Birch bark peels in a gentle wind, curling like thin paper. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, even while daylight lingers. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the meadow's outer grasses. The still lake reflects pale sky again, holding cloud shapes carefully. Dew forms on cool morning grass near the shore, shining softly. Moss grows on ancient stones at water's edge, darkened by moisture. Soft rain touches broad green leaves, making a steady hush in branches. A slow river bends through quiet meadow grasses, threading silver between reeds. Fog settles into low valleys beyond the river, smoothing distant contours. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along the trail, whispering lightly. Moonlight pools on the forest floor under pines and slender birches. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near ferns and low bracken. Dew forms on cool morning grass where meadow meets woodland shade. The still lake reflects a pale sky, holding light without movement. Moss grows on ancient stones scattered beside the riverbank path. Soft rain on broad green leaves keeps time with quiet dripping. A slow river bends through quiet meadowland, unhurried and clear. Fog settles into low valleys near the hills, softening every edge. Birch bark peels in gentle wind that moves through high branches slowly. Moonlight pools on the forest floor between roots and fallen needles. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air over clover and tall grass. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a narrow footpath. The still lake reflects pale sky and faint stars beginning to show. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, then gathers into tiny drops. Moss grows on ancient stones warmed earlier by sunlit hours. A slow river bends through quiet meadow curves, sounding like silk. Fog settles into low valleys where small streams meet shaded ground. Birch bark peels in gentle wind beside a stand of young trees. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and turns puddles into mirrors. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near the meadow's center. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far beyond the nearest hills tonight. The still lake reflects pale sky beneath drifting clouds and distant treetops. Dew forms on cool morning grass remembered from earlier hours of calm. Moss grows on ancient stones that sit quietly under sheltering branches. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes finer, almost like misted breath. A slow river bends through quiet meadow space with fewer ripples now. Fog settles into low valleys until even paths seem gently muted. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and makes shadows barely noticeable. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields as everything grows more hushed outside. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, with less motion each passing moment. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air and settle nearer to grasses. The slow river bends through quiet meadow distance, nearly silent now. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, deep green and cool. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, then slides in quiet lines. The still lake reflects a pale sky, holding each cloud gently. Dew forms on cool morning grass, though the light remains dusk-like. A slow river bends through quiet meadow reeds with unhurried grace. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing edges of distant trees. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and brightens small ferns. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, sounding like paper turning softly. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the meadow's last flowers. Soft rain on broad green leaves keeps a steady, delicate rhythm. Moss growing on ancient stones looks darker where water gathers. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, seems to hold its breath. Dew forming on cool morning grass beads along each slender blade. A slow river bending through quiet meadow grass carries faint reflections downstream. Fog settling into low valleys makes the far hills feel nearer. Moonlight pooling on forest floor traces calm shapes between roots. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind reveals lighter layers beneath. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air move like tiny lanterns over clover. Soft rain on broad green leaves turns to a finer, quieter patter. Moss growing on ancient stones cushions each step beside the trail. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, shows a single star near shoreward reeds. Dew forming on cool morning grass cools the air close to earth. A slow river bending through quiet meadow curves around smooth sandbars. Fog settling into low valleys drifts gently between fences and hedges. Moonlight pooling on forest floor spreads across needles and fallen twigs. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind sways with barely any sound. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air hover closer to sheltered grasses. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes almost weightless upon contact. Moss growing on ancient stones softens their edges with velvety texture. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, holds a faint line of moonlight. Dew forming on cool morning grass gathers at tips and waits quietly. A slow river bending through quiet meadow slips past cattails slowly. Fog settling into low valleys thickens slightly, then relaxes into calm layers. Moonlight pooling on forest floor makes small pools of silver among shadows. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind loosens another thin curl at its edge. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air drift lower, nearer resting stems. Soft rain on broad green leaves tapers into scattered droplets and silence between them. Moss growing on ancient stones glistens where moisture stays longest tonight. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, remains smooth, undisturbed by breeze. Dew forming on cool morning grass feels heavier as the air cools. A slow river bending through quiet meadow seems to move by memory alone. Fog settling into low valleys covers shallow hollows like folded cloth. Moonlight pooling on forest floor dims slightly behind thin cloud cover. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind slows until it barely shifts at all. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air become fewer, their glow gentler now. Soft rain on broad green leaves rests without movement for long moments. Moss growing on ancient stones holds tiny beads that shine softly together. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, carries one last shimmer. Then quiet steadiness returns. Dew forming on cool morning grass gathers along each blade in silence. A slow river bending through quiet meadow keeps a steady, unhurried curve. Fog settling into low valleys lies lower, smoothing the edges of hills. Moonlight pooling on forest floor rests between roots and fallen needles. Soft rain on broad green leaves taps with a careful, even rhythm. Moss growing on ancient stones darkens slightly as moisture settles deeper. The still lake, reflecting pale sky, holds a smooth surface without ripples. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind lifts and settles with patient ease. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air hover near the meadow's taller stems. Fog settling into low valleys drifts like cool breath across grasses. A slow river bending through quiet meadow carries small reflections downstream. Moonlight pooling on forest floor forms pale patches beside fern fronds. Snow falling softly on sleeping fields begins far off beyond the hills. Dew forming on cool morning grass stays bright where the air remains calm. Soft rain on broad green leaves continues, light enough to barely weigh them. Moss growing on ancient stones cushions each crevice with velvety green. The still lake reflecting pale sky mirrors a thin band of cloud above. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind curls like paper, then rests again. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air rise and settle, never hurrying. Moonlight pooling on forest floor turns silver where it touches damp wood. Fog settling into low valleys thickens gently around the meadow's quieter corners. A slow river bending through quiet meadow glides past reeds with soft persistence. Soft rain on broad green leaves collects at tips, then slips down slowly. Dew forming on cool morning grass spreads evenly, bead by bead. Moss growing on ancient stones looks darker where water gathers in hollows. The still lake reflecting pale sky shows a faint gradient from pearl to gray. Snow falling softly on sleeping fields seems to soften distant fences and paths. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind makes small curls that settle against trunks. Moonlight pooling on forest floor grows more diffuse under a thin veil of mist. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air become sparse points among shadowed stems. Fog settling into low valleys presses closer to the ground, smoothing every contour. A slow river bending through quiet meadow keeps its line, calm and continuous. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes finer, almost like cool breath. Dew forming on cool morning grass joins into larger droplets near clover heads. Moss growing on ancient stones holds water like a sponge, quietly full. The still lake reflecting pale sky remains level, reflecting nothing but light. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind loosens with care, then stays still again. Snow falling softly on sleeping fields drifts downward in tiny flakes, nearly weightless. Moonlight pooling on forest floor lingers at the base of pines and spruces. Fireflies drifting in warm dusk air dim further, their glow mild and steady. Fog settling into low valleys spreads wider, filling shallow dips between ridges. A slow river bending through quiet meadow rounds another bend with muted grace. Soft rain on broad green leaves slides along veins, tracing quiet paths downward. Dew forming on cool morning grass cools the air close to earth. The still lake reflecting pale sky looks like polished stone under soft light. Moss growing on ancient stones rests undisturbed, thick around old cracks and seams. Birch bark peeling in gentle wind pauses entirely as the breeze calms further. Moonlight pooling on forest floor softens until it blends with shadowed greens. Fog settles deeper into the low valleys, smoothing every hollow with quiet. A still lake reflects a pale sky, holding each cloud in place. Dew forms on cool morning grass, beating along thin blades. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, then slips down slowly. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, plush and cool. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, guiding reeds with steady patience. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, hovering above grasses without hurry. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, drawing gentle shapes among roots. Birch bark peels in a gentle wind, curling like paper along the trunk. Fog settles into low valleys again, turning distant trees into soft outlines. The still lake reflects pale sky tones, silvered and calm near shore. Dew forms on cool morning grass, brightening each blade with tiny beads. Soft rain falls on broad green leaves, making a hush beneath branches. Moss grows on ancient stones near the waterline, darkened by moisture. A slow river bends through quiet meadow grasses, carrying small ripples downstream. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far away, quieting every fence and furrow. Moonlight pools on the forest floor between ferns and low shrubs. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air over the meadow's edge. Birch bark peels in a gentle wind that barely moves needles. Fog settles into low valleys beyond the hills, resting like a blanket. The still lake reflects a pale sky as evening light thins gently. Dew forms on cool morning grass in shaded pockets near trees. Soft rain touches broad green leaves with small taps and pauses. Moss grows on ancient stones along a narrow bank, velvety and still. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, tracing curves around clumps of sedge. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields under distant clouds and dim light. Moonlight pools on the forest floor where pine cones lie scattered quietly. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, forming loose trails above flowers. Birch bark peels in gentle wind near the ridge, revealing lighter layers beneath. Fog settles into low valleys below that ridge, smoothing every contour softly. The still lake reflects pale sky colors that shift toward muted gray. Dew forms on cool morning grass beside the trail's edge. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves overhead, then slides to lower branches. Moss grows on ancient stones where water gathers in shallow cups. A slow river bends through quiet meadow as cattails lean inward slightly. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the meadow's far boundary. Moonlight pools on the forest floor in patches between trunks and fallen limbs. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near the river's bend, unhurried. Birch bark peels in gentle wind that passes like a mild breath. Fog settles into low valleys until even distant paths look softened. The still lake reflects pale sky light one last time before deeper dimness arrives. Dew forms on cool morning grass, already cooling under shade and calm air. Soft rain lingers on broad green leaves with barely audible movement now. Moss grows on ancient stones as if it belongs there forever. A slow river bends through quiet meadow with fewer ripples as night deepens gently. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields somewhere beyond view, steady and fine-grained. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and turns every fern into lacework shadows. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air until their glow seems smaller and softer. Fog settles into low valleys once more as hills rest under quiet skies tonight. The still lake reflects pale sky remnants like faint paint across glassy water surfaces nearby now. Dew forms on cool morning grass, though everything feels nearer to night than day now here. Soft rain lies upon broad green leaves and keeps its gentle rhythm at last here, now calmly, always today, too quietly now nearby again. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, making soft curls along the trunks. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, holding cool dampness. The still lake reflects pale sky, smooth as brushed silver. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, barely moving their edges. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying dim reflections downstream. Fog settles into low valleys, gathering like a thin wool blanket. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the grasses, unhurried. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, tracing calm shapes around roots. Dew forms on cool morning grass, though the light remains muted. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far away, a hushed curtain. Birch bark peels in gentle wind near the meadow's edge again. Moss grows on ancient stones, deep green and steady. Soft rain on broad green leaves makes tiny beads along each vein. The still lake reflects pale sky with no ripples near shore. Fog settles into low valleys and softens distant tree lines. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, keeping an even pace. Moonlight pools on the forest floor beneath pines and slender birches. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, floating between stems and seed heads. Dew forms on cool morning grass where shadows linger longer. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, quiet beyond the hills. Moss grows on ancient stones beside a small footbridge of weathered wood. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, revealing lighter layers underneath. The still lake reflects pale sky as clouds pass without hurry. Soft rain on broad green leaves keeps a steady whispering pattern. Fog settles into low valleys while the meadow holds its darker greens. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and rounds a bank of reeds. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and brightens patches of fern tips. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near the waterline, sparse now. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a narrow trail between shrubs. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields where fences lie under white silence. Moss grows on ancient stones that border the trail like old markers. The still lake reflects pale sky and faint treetops at distance. Soft rain on broad green leaves slides toward their tips and drops gently. Birch bark peels in gentle wind as branches sway with patience. Fog settles into low valleys and blurs the farthest hill curves. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, quieter than earlier moments. Moonlight pools on the forest floor with a softer sheen than before. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air and pause near tall flower heads. Dew forms on cool morning grass where a breeze barely touches. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the forest's outer line. Moss grows on ancient stones and darkens where rainwater gathers slowly. The still lake reflects pale sky until it seems like another calm ceiling. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes almost silent among thick canopies. Fog settles into low valleys and stays there without shifting much. A slow river bends through quiet meadow with only faint glimmers remaining. Birch bark peels in gentle wind while every sound grows more distant now. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and rests there like cool milk glass. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, fewer lights over resting grasses now. Dew forms on cool morning grass, each bead holding a small hush. The still lake reflects pale sky, smoothing every cloud into quiet color. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the shore, thick and softly damp. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying calm reflections downstream. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, sliding along their veins. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, spaced wide like gentle notes. Fog settles into low valleys and lies there with patient weight. Moonlight pools on the forest floor brightening ferns without any sound. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like thin paper ribbons. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the trees, light as sifted flour. Dew forms on cool morning grass again along a shaded path. The still lake reflects pale sky, and the shoreline seems even farther. Moss grows on ancient stones near a small footbridge of weathered wood. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, turning around reeds and grasses. Soft rain taps broad green leaves with a rhythm that softens quickly. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the meadow's darker corners. Fog settles into low valleys where wildflowers close their petals for evening. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and gathers around roots and fallen needles. Birch bark peels in gentle wind while trunks stand close together. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields and settles without leaving sharp edges. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a rise overlooking rolling hills. The still lake reflects pale sky with no ripple to break it. Moss grows on ancient stones at the hill's base, velvet over roughness. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, its surface dim and steady. Soft rain clings to broad green leaves and makes them slightly heavier. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near hedges that border open land. Fog settles into low valleys between hills, smoothing every hollow gently. Moonlight pools on the forest floor under pines that breathe resin scents. Birch bark peels in gentle wind beside a narrow trail of packed earth. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far away, barely visible in moonlight. Dew forms on cool morning grass within the forest clearing's center. The still lake reflects pale sky beyond trees, seen between dark branches. Moss grows on ancient stones where water once ran more freely. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and whispers against smooth banks. Soft rain touches broad green leaves overhead, then drops to ferns below. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near the river's curve. Fog settles into low valleys until distant hills seem closer together. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and turns puddles into muted mirrors. Birch bark peels in gentle wind with a soft scrape against itself. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields as clouds pass slowly overhead. Dew forms on cool morning grass at meadow edges where shadows linger longest. The still lake reflects pale sky behind mist that thins near waterline. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, cool beneath careful steps. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, and its curve feels unhurried. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves until droplets release one by one. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, then settle nearer to grass's tips. Fog settles into low valleys and holds steady like folded cloth layers. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, and everything becomes gentler still now. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like paper along slender trunks. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the meadow's far fence. Dew forms again on cool morning grass where the path meets clover. The still lake reflects pale sky, holding each cloud in quiet balance. Moss grows on ancient stones, and their edges feel rounded with time. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying reeds in a steady line. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, tapping lightly without hurry. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, tracing small arcs above fern tips. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing the distance between hill and stream. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, silvering roots and fallen needles. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, revealing pale layers beneath darker skin. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, covering furrows with a thin hush. Dew forms on cool morning grass, beating along each blade's narrow edge. The still lake reflects pale sky, and ripples stay close to shore. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the water, brightening their shaded faces. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, and minnows keep near grasses. Soft rain on broad green leaves makes tiny rhythms under the canopy. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, hovering near milkweed pods. Fog settles into low valleys, softening fenced lines and distant trees. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, leaving faint light between mossy roots. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, fluttering softly against nearby branches. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, settling into tufts of dry grass. Dew forms on cool morning grass where crickets pause among stems. The still lake reflects pale sky, and a loon glides without sound. Moss grows on ancient stones near a bend where the trail narrows. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, passing willows that lean patiently. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves until they shine like polished jade. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, then gather over a shallow pool. Fog settles into low valleys, resting close to earth like a light blanket. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, touching mushrooms and pine cones gently. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, making soft motions at the edge of sight. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the ridge's rounded shoulder. Dew forms on cool morning grass along the riverbank's narrow terrace. The still lake reflects pale sky while cattails stand motionless nearby. Moss grows on ancient stones tucked under ferns beside the trail. A slow river bends through quiet meadow with a calm surface sheen. Soft rain on broad green leaves slides toward their tips slowly. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the meadow's last warm breath. Fog settles into low valleys where small streams thread between grasses. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and softens every hard outline. Birch bark peels in gentle wind as branches sway with measured ease. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields while distant pines remain darkly still. Dew forms on cool morning grass and gathers along spider threads nearby. The still lake reflects pale sky with a smoothness like glass. Moss grows on ancient stones near an old stump ringed by lichens. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and keeps its patient direction. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves and dampens every scent to sweetness. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air until their glow feels far away. Fog settles into low valleys as evening coolness spreads across open ground. Moonlight pools on the forest floor and rests quietly among fallen leaves. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, then lies flat against wood again. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields as everything becomes quieter now. Dew forms on cool morning grass along the meadow's narrow edge. A still lake reflects pale sky, holding each cloud in place. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, dark and velvety. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, tracing a gentle curve. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, making small beads that linger. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the grasses, unhurried. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing the distance between hills. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, silvering roots and fallen needles. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like paper and settling back. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the treeline, light and even. Dew forms on cool morning grass near a wooden gate, clear and bright. A still lake reflects pale sky, while the shoreline remains quiet. Moss grows on ancient stones where water once ran in thin threads. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, sliding past reeds without sound. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, tapping a calm rhythm overhead. Fog settles into low valleys and softens every far outline. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near hedges at the meadow's border. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, resting between ferns and pine cones. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along the trail, pale against shadowed trunks. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, covering furrows with smoothness. Dew forms on cool morning grass as the air turns cooler again. A still lake reflects pale sky with a steady surface and silence. Moss grows on ancient stones by the waterline, thickening quietly over time. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and carries dim reflections. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves until each leaf feels heavier. Fog settles into low valleys and holds there like a blanket. Moonlight pools on the forest floor with a muted glow beneath branches. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air farther away, fewer points of light. Birch bark peels in gentle wind with a soft rasp that soon stops. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields under distant hills and calm clouds. Dew forms on cool morning grass until every blade shines faintly. A still lake reflects pale sky, and everything stays settled and still.